Hello, I'm going to be reading the next chapter of The Little People. Last chapter we read, asked a few questions. Let's see how you got on with questions, shall we? So the questions were, question number 1, what did Arrietty take with her when she went out on her own? And the answer was a hat pin and some string. Okay. Question number 2, where did the boy hide the letter? And the answer to that is he hid it behind the picture. Remember, he got up in bed, which really frightened Arrietty because he's really big to her, and he stood up and reached behind the letter behind the picture above his bed. Okay. And then number 3, what did the letter say? Because the boy delivered the letter and Uncle Henry had written something on the back and then left it in the rabbit hole, and the boy had gone back and picked it up, and it said, tell your Aunt Loopy to come home. So Arrietty's wondering where Aunt Loopy is now. Mind you, she's got more things to think about, if you remember, because when she went out on her own and visited the boy who was in his bed, she found out that he'd delivered the letter, got a reply, but all the time Pod had been in her bedroom with Great Aunt Sophie chatting. He came out and heard her voice and saw her talking to the boy. So now she's in big trouble. Okay, so now I'm going to read chapter 13. Pod did not speak until they reached the sitting room, nor did he look at her. She had had to scramble after him as best she might. He had ignored her efforts to help him shut the gates, but once, when she tripped, he'd waited until she had got up again, watching her, it seemed, almost without interest, while she brushed the dust off her knees. Supper was laid and the ironing put away, and Homily came running in from the kitchen, surprised to see them together. Pod threw down his borrowing bag. He stared at his wife. What's the matter? Faltered Homily, looking from one to the other. She was in the night nursery, said Pod quietly, talking to that boy. Homily moved forward, her hands clasped tremblingly against her apron, her startled eyes flicking to and fro. Oh no, she breathed. Pod sat down. He ran a tired hand over his eyes and forehead. His face looked heavy, like a piece of dough. Now what? He said. Homily stood quite still, bowed. She stood over her clasped hands and stared at Arrietty. Oh, you never, she whispered. They're frightened, Arrietty realised. They're not angry at all. They are very, very frightened. She moved forward. It's all right, she began. Homily sat down suddenly on the cotton reel. She began to tremble. Oh, she said, whatever shall we do? She began to rock herself very slightly to and fro. Oh, Mother, don't, pleaded Arrietty. It isn't so bad as that. It really isn't. She felt up the front of her jumper. At first she could not find the letter. It had slid round her side to the back. But at last she drew it out, very crumpled. Look, she said. Here's a letter from Uncle Henry. I wrote to him, and the boy took the letter. You wrote to him? Cried Homily, on a kind of suppressed shriek. Oh, she moaned, and closed her eyes. Whatever next? Whatever shall we do? And she fanned herself limply with her bony hand. Get your mother a drink of water, Arrietty, said Pod sharply. Arrietty brought it in a sawn-off hazel shell. It had been sawn off at the pointed end and was shaped like a brandy glass. But whatever made you do such a thing, Homily? Arrietty, said Homily more calmly, setting the empty cup down on the table. What Whatever came over you? So Arrietty told them about being seen that morning under the cherry tree, and how she had kept it from them to not worry them, and what the boy had said about dying out, and how, more important, how imperative it had seemed to make sure the Hendreries were alive. "Do understand," pleaded Arrietty. "Please understand. I'm trying to save the race." "Oh, the expressions she uses," said Homily to Pod under her breath, not without pride. But Pod was not listening. "Save the race," he repeated grimly. "It's people like you, my girl, who do things sudden like, with no respect for tradition, who'll finish us borrowers once and for all. Don't you see what you've done?" Arrietty met his accusing eyes. "Yes," she said falteringly. I've got in touch with the only other ones still alive, so that," she went on bravely, "from now on we can all stick together." "All stick together," Pod repeated angrily. "Do you think Hendreary's lot will ever come to live back here? Can you see your mother emigrating to a badger set, 2 fields away, out in the open, and no hot water laid on?" "Never!" cried Homily in a full, rich voice, which made them both turn and look at her. "Or do you see your mother walking across 2 fields and a garden," went on Pod, "2 fields full of cows and crows and horses and what not, to take a cup of tea with your Aunt Loopy, whom she never liked much anyway?" "But wait," he said, as Arrietty tried to speak. "That's not the point. As far as all that goes, we're just where we was. The point," he went on, leaning forward and speaking with great solemnity, "is this: that boy now knows where we live." "Oh no," said Arrietty. "I never told him that. "You told him," interrupted Pod, "about the kitchen pipe bursting. You told him how all our stuff got washed away to the grating." He sat back again, glaring at her. "He's only got to think," he pointed out. Arrietty was silent, and Pod went on. "That's a thing that has never happened before, never in the whole long history of the Borrowers. Borrowers have been seen, yes, borrowers have been caught, maybe, but no human being has ever known where any borrower lived. We're in very grave danger, Arrietty, and you've put us there, and that's a fact." "Oh, Pod," whimpered Homily, "don't frighten the child." "Nay, Homily," said Pod more gently, "my poor old girl, excuse me, I don't want to frighten no one, but this is serious. Suppose I said to you, pack up tonight, all our bits and pieces. Where would you go?" Excuse me, Mo. "Not to Hendreary's," cried Homily. "Not there, Pod. I could never share a kitchen with Loopy." "No," agreed Pod, "not to Hendreary's, and I don't see for why. The boy knows about that too." "Oh!" cried Homily in real dismay. "Yes," said Pod. "Couple of smart terriers, or a well-trained ferret, and that'd be the end of that lot." "Oh, Pod," said Homily, and began again to tremble. The thought of living in the badger set had been bad enough, but the thought of not having even that to go to seemed almost worse. "I daresay I could have got it nice in the end," she said, "providing we lived quite separate." "Well, it's no good thinking of it now," said Pod. He turned to Arrietty. "What does your Uncle Hendreary say in his letter?" "Yes," exclaimed Homily, "where's this letter?" "It doesn't say much," said Arrietty, passing over the paper. "It just says, 'Tell your Aunt Loopy to come home.'" "What?" exclaimed Homily sharply, looking at the letter upside down. "Come home? What can he be meaning?" "He means," said Pod, "that Loopy must have set off to come here, and that she never arrived." Set off to come here, repeated Homily. But when? How should I know, said Pod. It doesn't say when, said Arrietty. But, exclaimed Homily, might have been weeks ago. It might, said Pod. Long enough away for him to want her back. Oh, cried Homily, all those poor little children. Well, they're growing up now, said Pod. But something must have happened to her, exclaimed Homily. Yes, said Pod. He turned to Arrietty. See what I mean, Arrietty, about those fields? Oh, Pod, said Homily, her eyes full of tears. I don't suppose none of us will ever see poor Loopy again. Well, we wouldn't have anyway, said Pod. Pod, said Homily soberly, I'm frightened. Everything seems to be happening at once. What are we going to do? Well, said Pod, there's nothing we can do tonight, that's certain, but have a bit of supper and a good night's rest. He rose to his feet. Oh, Arrietty, wailed Homily suddenly, you naughty, wicked girl. How could you go and start all this? How could you go and talk to a human being? If only I was seen, cried Arrietty. I couldn't help being seen. Papa was seen. I don't think it's all as awful as you're trying to make out. I don't think human beings are all that bad. They're bad and they're good, said Pod. They're honest and they're artful. It's just as it takes them at the moment. And animals, if they could talk, could be the same. Steer clear of them, that's what I've always been told, no matter what they promise you. No good never really came to no one from any human being. So, that's the end of that chapter. She was in proper trouble, wasn't she? Poor Arrietty. Okay, so questions for that chapter. Question 1. Why is Pod so upset? Okay. Question number 2. What did Arrietty say she was trying to do? And then question number 3. What did Pod say they should do after supper? Okay. So see how you get on with those questions. And then we'll do the answers next time we read a chapter. Okay, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.